basically what we're talking about is if, for example, let's say that you're working a job and the job pays you $10 an hour. Okay? But then they like the job you're doing, so they bump you up to $14 an hour. Okay? That would be a fairly large amount for somebody that works per hour and not on a salary or something. Okay? So you have $10 per hour, and they bump you up to $14 an hour because you're such a hard worker. Okay? Those of you that went down to 6, well, that's pretty much self-explanatory. So we have $14 an hour, and we want to know what they increased my hourly wage. Okay, I want to know how much my hourly wage increased, because I want to, brag to my friends and, all right, man, they increased my pay such and such amount. Okay, so how we do that? Well, first of all, this is amount of change is what we need to figure. Okay, and so we take the original amount, subtract it from the new amount. Okay, and that's $4. So my pay changed $4 an hour. Obviously, you can do that in your head. Okay, that's not the part that we have to, that's just the easy part. Now, the actual to find out the percent of how much it changed is to simply take our percent of change is equal to the increase or decrease, okay, also known as the amount of change, over the original amount. Okay, this is this formula right there. Okay, I usually just call it AC over original amount, or AC meaning the amount of change, okay, over the original amount. Okay, now, basically then what we have is equal to 4 over 10. Okay, and that's just a fraction. Okay, 4 over 10 that I want to convert, I want to know the percent of change, so I want to take that fraction and convert it to a percent. Well, we already know that there's two ways to do that. Change it to a decimal, then change the decimal to a percent, or set it equal to P over 100. Okay, either way is okay here. So I can take and do this. I can take 4/10 equal to P over 100. Okay, that's where I'm getting my 4/10. Or I can just simply divide 10 into 4. 10 doesn't go into 4. 10 goes into 40, 0.4 times. Okay, now I have 0.40, but I have to take and move the decimal 2 places to the right for 40%. Okay, over here we would just cross multiply. You'd have 10p equal 400. And then you divide by 10 to both sides. Zeros cancel, giving me p is equal to 40%. No, you're going to use that formula. Percent change is equal to amount of change over the original amount. So that's a 40% increase. Okay, because on most of these problems, they want you to tell them whether it's an increase or a decrease. Obviously, if it increases from the original amount, it's an increase. If it decreases from the original amount, it would be a decrease. Zach? How did I get 10? That was the original amount. My original pay was $10 an hour. And so they increased it to 14, which is $4 an hour increase. So basically they increased your pay 40% per hour, which is very unusual. Okay? So you probably wouldn't see that big of an increase all at once, unless you're just a stellar employee. All right, so that is what it's talking about when it's talking about the percent increase versus the percent of decrease. All right, let's look at another one. Now, some of these will just be simple numbers. I went from 8 to 12, what's the increase? I went from 22 to 16, what's the decrease? What percent of decrease? Some of them are going to be a little bit more complicated, but not that much complicated. All right, let's look at one. Let's say here, let's look at number 6. Number 6 has the original amount is $1,953. Now, obviously, we don't know what this means. We don't know what it is. Okay, we just know that it's $1,953. We don't know if it's a paycheck or a cost of something. Okay. Now, the new cost, the new amount is $1,085. Okay. So, step one. Step one is to find the amount of change. Okay? The amount of change means we're going to take 1,953 minus 1,085. Do what? $868? Okay. So the amount of change then, we'll call it AC, is $868. That's the amount of change. Step 2 is plug in the amount of change we're calling AC into our percent of change formula. Okay, so I have to take $868, so PC equals percent of change. Percent of change equals $868 over the original amount. The original amount, $1,953. Obviously a little bit more difficult simply because you're dealing with a larger fraction. Okay. Me personally, I find it easier just to go ahead and divide it out, get the decimal, and change the decimal to a percent. So we have 1953 into 868. Okay. Well, 1953 doesn't go into 868. So 1953 goes into 8,680. Okay. Well, I've got to look at this. 19 and 86. 19 goes into 86 how many times? 4 times. 4 times 20 would be 80. Let's try 5. Let's bump it up 1 here. So we have 5 times 3 would be 15. Carry my 1. 5 times 5 is 25. Plus 1 would be 6. Carry my 2. 5 times 9 is 45. Plus 2 would be 7. Carry my 4. And so that's not going to work. So we got to go with the 4. So we got to use 4 here. So we use 4. 4 times 3 is 12. Carry my 1. 21. Carry my 2. 8. Carry my 3. 7,812. So we subtract those, got to borrow, make that a 7, make that a 10, make that 8, 6, borrow, make that a 16, 868. Bring down a 0. Wow. Same number we started with. So it's going to keep doing this. It's going to keep doing the 4s. So I believe the directions tell you to, okay, so we said the other day that when we have a repeating decimal, we want to round to the nearest 10th percent. Okay? Not to the nearest 10th, but the nearest 10th percent. Okay, there is a difference obviously there. So we want to round this, so we take 0.444, we move it 2 places to the right, gives me 44.44. I'm rounding to that 4, so I circle that 4. And so that gives me the percent of change is equal to 44.4%. I'm rounding. Yeah, you do. Look at the arrow pointing to the 4. All right. And this was a decrease. Can we use DC and no. You have to write out decrease and increase. Okay? All right. I want you to try number 7. Number 7 says the original amount is equal to 150. The new amount is equal to 63. Okay, so try that one on your own. I'll come around and check your answers. All right. Most of you are getting to the right spot. You have to take 150 minus 63 to find the amount of change. The amount of change was equal to 87. So now we take this amount and plug it into our percent of change formula, which is the amount of change over the original. Okay, so that is equal to 87 over 150. Okay, that's where we put the 87 is in our. Now it's just a matter of taking 87 and dividing it by 150. Okay, so 87, we're looking at basically 15 into 87 goes about 5 times. So we do the 5. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 5 is 5. Carry my 2. That'd be 750. That gives me 120 as my remainder. I bring down my next 0. 150 into 1200. Well, 15 goes into 120 8 times. So it is 1200. Remainder 0. So now I have 0.58 as my percent of change, but I have to do the final step, which is to move the decimal 2 places to the right to convert it to a percent. So the percent of change, 58% decrease. Okay? Okay, now let's look at number 12. Okay, 12 is a little bit different, not just giving you just the straight, new, original. You know, you always sort of freak out when you get the word problems for some reason. Okay. It says last year your class held a fundraiser and donated $850 to a local charity. This year your class donation increased by 24%. How much did your class donate this year? Okay. This one's a little different because you do? No, if you do. Well, all right. Let's think about our formula: percent change over the amount of change. The amount of change over original amount. Okay. So, in this problem, do we have the original amount? Okay. What is the original amount? Okay. Original amount was $850. That's how much they donated to charity last year. Do we have the new amount? We don't have the new amount, so that's going to be our X. Okay. Well, do we have the percent of change? What is the percent of change? 24%. Now, that's 24% of an increase or decrease? Increase. Okay. So, here's where people will struggle. There's two different ways to do this problem. Okay, I'm going to show you both ways, but I want to talk about them first. If I gave $100 last year, and I'm going to increase that by 24%, okay, it's what? What did you say? 204? No. Oh, you're answering the problem. Okay, I'm not there yet. If I'm going to give 24% more than I gave last year, don't I have to give the $100 first and then increase that by 24%? So I'm really giving 124% of what I did. Okay? Now, two ways to do this problem. As I said, there's this way here, which we're going to do, and I'm going to show you the other way. So I need to plug in this information here into our formula. So our formula is percent change, so that's 24% is equal to the amount of change I don't know. The original amount, $850. Okay? Now, we said yesterday, one of the reasons why we went over what we went over yesterday, what do we have to do to the percent before we can manipulate it, Anthony? Quit flapping your arms like they're wings and pay attention. What do we have to do to percents before we can manipulate them? Drew. Or fraction. So we have to change the percent of 24% to a fraction or decimal. So we really have 0.24 is equal to x over 850. Now, from what we learned in chapter, whatever it was, chapter 7, I guess, chapter 7, we learned that we have to solve this equation by taking and multiplying both sides by 850. Hang on. Hey, let the person that's actually graduated college teach. X over 850 is the same thing as 1 over 850 times x. Okay? And so the reciprocal of 1 over 850 would be, the reciprocal of this would be 850 over 1. So that's basically what we're doing when we multiply by 850. The other way to look at it is that we are dividing 850 into x, And the inverse of dividing by 850 would be to multiply by 850 to both sides, okay? And so that's why we're doing those two things. All right, now, when I take and multiply 0.24 times 850, what do I get, Owen? 0.24 times 850. I figured you already had it figured out.
Yeah, I did too.
How'd you do it?
We did the multiplying way. I did the proportion way. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me what you do. You went A over 850 equal 24 over 100. Okay, that's a good way to do it. What did you end up getting the total as? Okay, yeah. Here, if we take 850 times 0.24, okay, that would be 0, 0, carry my 2, 4 times 8 is 32, be 34, okay, add a 0. That would be 0, 10, be 17, be 0, 0, 4, 0, 204. Okay? Now, you're going, well, that's not what Owen got. We're not done yet. This is the amount of increase. In other words, this is what they're increasing their donation by this year from last year. So we have to take last year dollar amount plus the increase amount. Okay? So that would be 850 plus the increase amount of 204 equals 1,054 is this year's donation. Okay? As I stated, that's one way to do it in this specific problem. Okay? Now, what Owen did, and did you do it the same way, Nick? And what Owen did and what Nick did is they put it in their proportion. Okay? Remember, our proportion is A over B equal P over 100. This is another way to do it. Okay? But you have to really understand what each thing stands for. Okay? This is obviously percent. This is the total. Okay? And here it would be the original. And then your A would be the amount of change. Okay? And so what they did is they plugged in A over 850 is equal to 24 over 100. And the bottom line is he did the exact same thing we just did. Okay, let's look at it. He took and said, okay, we cross multiply. That would be 100 times A is equal to 24 times 850. Okay. Now, when you multiply that out, what do you get when you multiply 24 times 850, Owen? 20,400, yeah. And 100A, okay, well, that's what we basically got here, but we've got to take over here, this dividing by 100 is the step where we moved it to 0.24. This step right here, where we moved that to that, that's this step. 2 zeros cancel out, giving you 204. Okay, that's the amount of change. Now, the way you can do it where you don't have to take the extra step is do this. The extra step, what I'm talking about, is where you're adding 204 to 850, that extra step. All you have to do is this. Just take the original problem that we had right here. What was it? X08. That's the original equation we came up with. Just simply do this one step. Now solve that the same way we solved it, and you'll get the actual answer. Okay? In other words, if you multiply, so we have 1.24 equal x over 850. If I multiply both sides by 850, okay, multiply that side, multiply this side by 850. Okay, when you do that, that cancels. Leave me with x is equal to 850 times 1.24. When you do that, you get, when you actually multiply that out, you get that right there. And that's your actual answer. So, once again, why did I add the 1 to the 0.24? Because for me to increase my donation, I have to give 100% of what I gave last year this year. Okay? And so I'm really increasing, from the beginning, I'm going, I paid my $850 that I paid last year this year. Now I'm going to increase that by 24%. Okay? So it's 124. Let's say that I was going to decrease it. Let's say I was going to decrease my donation. Maybe my money wasn't as good this year, whatever. I'm going to decrease last year's donation by 10%. Okay? I'm going to decrease last year's donation by 10%. So if 100% of 850 is 100%, if I'm going to decrease that by 10%, what would I have left? What would it be of last year's total? What? Yeah. If I'm given $850 last year, but I'm decreasing that amount by 10% this year. Well, I could take 10% times 850 and then subtract that amount from 850, correct? If I'm decreasing my donation? Well, instead of doing that, I can just take the 10% and decrease it off the 100% that I gave last year and make it 90%. Now, if I'll take 90% times 850, that'll give me the actual amount that I'm going to give this year. Instead of having to take, 10% of 850 is $85. I got to take $85 and subtract it from 850, and that's the amount I'm giving. No, just take 10% off the 100%, it's 90%. Multiply it by 850, take 0.9, multiply it by 850, and that's how much you're going to give. Just like with the increase. If I say I'm going to increase your paycheck, if I'm going to increase your your yearly wage or your yearly salary, and I'm going to increase it by 20%. Okay? Well, if you'll take last year's salary and multiply it by 120%, that'll be this year's salary. Okay? So it's an easier way to try to find, instead of having to take the 2 or 3 different steps at the end, you can do it at the beginning, and that it helps you out a little bit. Okay? Because if we're increasing something, we have to have the original amount. So whatever you're increasing it, that's going to be the amount. Okay? All right, now, your homework. Your homework is going to be, it's not a lot. Let's go 9.6, 9.6, and we're going to go 2 through 14.
It's not 90 problems like Zach said. You know what Zach said? It's not a lot of problems, you make it like 90 problems. I didn't say that.
Okay, so 2 through 14, we've done 4 or 5 of them, so, you basically got to do about 8 on your own. Now, several of them are word problems. Okay? So you got to think through them like we just did.